The EU digital identity is coming in 2026. To tell us more about it, we have Thomas, who will explain where we are and where we're going, and Anya, who will clarify the privacy and security aspects of it. Thomas Loninger is a digital rights advocate and key figure in the EU internet policy, active in digital identity since 2017. Anya Lehmann is a cryptographer and a professor at Potsdam University, and she worked on anonymity and authentication for almost 2 decades. Please give them a warm applause.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. And we actually want to start with a little disclosure. So both Thomas and I work at different identity projects, both on the German and European level. And we are both jury members in what's called Sprint-Funke. That's an ongoing competition in Germany where different prototypes of these identity wallets are going to be developed. And since about 2 months, I'm also supporting the Sprint EODI project in their exploration of zero-knowledge proofs.
And I'm also in an advisory capacity in an ad hoc committee of the European Commission around this whole digital identity stuff, basically another role to tell them what's wrong with their proposals. And it's important to say that this talk solely expresses our both personal views, and these are completely independent from all of the other organizations that we are affiliated with. And it's important to stress that we are part of the jury from the German government. They handed out 3.9 million euro of German taxpayer money to develop open source prototypes for what eventually might become the German digital identity wallet. And we both had to sign an NDA, you can read on our website, which basically bars us from talking specifically about the decisions that were taken. But I'm just going to say that we are very happy that we had the opportunity to express minority opinions when we disagreed, and that we had no prior knowledge about the composition of the jury before joining it. That's the disclosure. Let's talk about what actually eIDAS is. I know some people might be bored, but it's still important to reiterate what's coming here. So this is a European regulation. It's a law that is already in effect. And what it will mean is that we'll all soon be offered an app on our smartphones by our governments that will contain all types of attributes, both from the government, like our legal identity, but also our university diplomas, driver license, passports, public transport tickets, whatever, it is an open system. This app has 4 basic functions. You can log into a website, you can identify yourself, verify any other type of attribute in the wallet vis-a-vis another party, and you can also sign documents legally binding. And all of this is open vis-a-vis so-called relying parties. These are all types of public entities like your tax account and your tax office, but it could also be a bank when you're opening up an account, or any other type of website, physical building, or whatever. This is not me. Yeah. So there are actually several other types of legislations that come into play for this whole thing. First, all of the big tech platforms will be obliged to use it, and that also includes Facebook and Instagram, but also, can we fix this? I mean, I'm not doing anything here. The interesting part here is that this is also applicable to so-called very large online platforms. So everything that has a certain dominance in the European market, that includes, for example, also porn platforms. So you will use the wallet also to log into X-porn or whatever. Another thing is also driver licenses will be part of the wallet. There is another directive for that that's still under negotiation. You'll also use it for doctor visits, the so-called European half data space, and that is already passed. That will happen. And that will mean also when you go to the pharmacy, when you deliver a prescription, or when you are also your vaccination status, for example. Age verification is another one. So this wallet is a means of verifying your age. We know chat control, we know the Digital Services Act, so these are already things in the pipeline that we hopefully can prevent, like chat control or DSA that is already passed. And Digital Euro is another one, which is also built on top of the wallet. And last one, smart borders. So there is a thing called EU Digital Travel App, which is another piece of legislation that basically links the wallet to our passports whenever we cross a Schengen border. So to summarize, there's a broad range of use cases that are widely different, from opening up a bank account to buying cigarettes or logging into Instagram. And this whole thing tries to be the solution to all of them. And as you can expect, it's destined to create a lot of problems. This is the timeline. We started in 2021. The law is already adopted and in effect. We are right now in the stage where we write the technical specification, the so-called implementing acts. The first batch is already concluded, and the second batch hopefully or might be done early 2025. And the deadline for member states to offer this wallet to their citizens and residents is 28th of November 2026. That's the basic. Now let's go to the reality check. That's what we promised. So there are 5 central components, safeguards, that are in the law, and now is the time to do a thorough analysis on what they will actually mean in practice. The first is over-asking. The wallet will hold so many different attributes about our lives that when we are using it on a daily basis, it's very important that a hotel check-in doesn't suddenly start asking for your financial information. That when you are buying cigarettes, you are not automatically also identifying. So this is all done with, in the first place, the registration of everyone who wants to ask anything via the wallet. And there's also a public registry where you can scrape via an API all of the companies and everything that they are asking. We already got a warning, and also in some countries like Germany, Netherlands, and Austria, a blocking that they will prevent such illegal over-asking requests. But here comes the plot twist. The Commission is right now trying to create a loophole here to basically leave it up to member states if you are actually protected, if the registration from companies in their territory is actually known to the wallet. And for example, this means Facebook Ireland will have a wildcard certificate to ask us anything. Gambling company in Malta might do the same. This is a big problem. And now over to Anja on the actual reality check on that.
Yeah, so for the reality check, this is actually a kind of a technical, very easy problem to be solved. It's classic client authentication for the relying party. So what you do is you just give the relying party an access credential that details which user attributes it's allowed to request, and then ensure that the user's wallet is always checking that the relying party really has the necessary access rights to access these attributes and do not send anything over if it doesn't. So it's kind of easily solved on a technical level, but absolutely mandatory that this is enforced, because otherwise this is really going to be the easiest way to circumvent all other nice privacy features we can add on the cryptographic level.
Thank you. Next thing, unobservability. This is very close to our hearts. It is the protection against tracking and profiling. Basically, all of the user behavior that's happening on the platform needs to be protected, both from the providers of attributes, like your university cannot see the diploma that you're showing to a potential new employer, or from the provider of the system, the operator, very often the government. And since this tool spans across all areas of life, this could really be a panoptical situation if we don't succeed here. So what's actually in the law? We have very strong unobservability when it comes to attribute providers, but it has loopholes when we talk about the government, the operator of the system, because there the legal text foresees a possibility to spy when it is necessary for the provision of the service. This is really not good, but that's the law that we are stuck with. And a lot will therefore actually depend on where the private keys are. Will they be on our device? Then it's actually not very necessary to have any telemetry data or other stuff that goes to a server. But if this is on government hardware security models, then it will actually be much harder to implement that type of unobservability.
Okay, so now let's have a look again at the technical side. So from the technical side, the best way is to go for user-centric setting. And the current idea is to do that via user credentials. And a credential is basically just a list of signed attributes that the user gets signed from a trusted authority, the identity or attribute provider, which also signs the attributes together with a public key that is in the possession or where the user controls the underlying secret key. And then if the user, no, it doesn't.
Ich glaube, du musst näher ran.
If the user then wants to authenticate to a relying party and wants to prove that she owns certain attributes, she can simply send over the signed credential to the relying party and do a proof of possession that she owns the underlying secret key of the public key that's in there. And the relying party can then just verify that the signature is valid and indeed comes from a trusted authority and check that the proof of possession is valid too. And that is kind of sort of a liveness check that the user is really the proper owner of these attributes. And because the identity provider is not involved in the presentation of that credential, we have the unobservability. It has no clue where we spend it. When it comes to unobservability towards the wallet provider, as Thomas said, this will depend where the key lives. And ideally, the key would live in a secure element, a particular trusted piece of hardware in your user phones. But unfortunately, the secure elements that are out there are not at the necessary trust level that is demanded at the moment. So in Germany, the current plan is to go for a cloud HSM solution. So your secret keys will be living in the cloud, and you have to ask it every time you want to make a proof of possession. So that is kind of going to leak some timing information, at least, but this is also just kind of a temporary measure. Eventually, this should all go to the users' phones. Okay, back to you.
Third safeguards, selective disclosure. That means when you are presented with a request for information, you can refuse it completely, you can accept it completely, or say, I'm going to give you my university degree. I have a bachelor or a master, but not at which university, not with which student ID. So you can selectively disclose parts of your attributes. And that is clarified throughout the legal text. There has never been any question, and we actually got some more clarifications in the final round of implementing acts.
Okay, looking again at the technical side, interestingly, selective disclosure is already going against the nature of signatures. Because if you want to verify a signature, you have to have the entire input, and you cannot change stuff. You cannot also omit attributes. But there's a very nice trick that we can do, and that's what's currently planned, is that instead of signing all attributes as one big blob, you actually sign each attribute as an individually salted hash. And then the user has the power to decide whether it wants to reveal an attribute or just get the blinded hash of it. So with that, we actually have selective disclosure, and thumbs up from that side. What else do you need, Thomas?
I need unlinkability. This is again another protection against tracking and profiling. What it means is that you are protected against the correlation of individual interactions. So you can prove your age in a club, you can buy cigarettes, you can use public transport, and all of these interactions, where you are not identifying yourself, of course, cannot be correlated with each other. That means it should be impossible for anyone at best to really see where you are moving, with whom you are interacting. And first and foremost, there is a very stupid typo. The actual law in the EU, you can check this in the journal, speaks about unlikability. It's one of these great examples. If you open the law in Word, it has these red lines under it, and somebody in legal services thought, oh my God, this must be a mistake. So yeah, we corrected this in implementing acts. There's actually no effect. It's just embarrassing and shows you what happens if the EU has too many laws at the same time. The actual legal text says that unlinkability needs to be ensured whenever you don't identify yourself. So this is more or less what we wanted. It is important to say that in some of the technical specifications, we do have information that's mandatory, which can again allow you to correlate, like an issuer or expiration date, a revocation identifier. So things like that can be very dangerous in order to, like, if you're clever, there are attack vectors that are definitely possible. But let's look what is in the core and the meat of things.
Yeah, and this is actually where things now get complicated. Because even if you try to use selective disclosure and try really hard to not reveal any identifiable information about yourself, you will be linkable, you will be traceable whenever you use the same credential twice. So let's think that you, for instance, go to a lying party and you just prove that you're a user from Germany to access movies from Germany. And then you go to another relying party and prove that you really have a name if you want to, for instance, send a certified email or something like that. Then you would not expect from these two presentations that you would be linkable across both. But you are. Because what you're also showing along with that is the identity provider's signature on these attributes and your own public key. And this was the cryptographic evidence that made the solution secure. But these cryptographic evidence are highly unique values. So now the security basically backfires in terms of privacy because you become traceable by that cryptographic evidence. And that is something that we do not want, and that's forbidden by law. And the current solution to circumvent the problem is to say, okay, let's not just give the user a single credential bound to a single public key, but actually a batch of one-time credentials. So you will get, let's say, 100 credentials, all with the same attributes, but all bound to a different public key. And then if you go to a relying party, you will always choose a fresh credential and a fresh public key, make the selective disclosure, and then throw the credential and the key away. And that has a number of challenges in terms of key management and what actually user binding means in such a setting, but you will actually get the unlinkability of the different presentations because now the linkage over the cryptographic evidence is gone. What you still do not get, though, is unlinkability if the identity provider and the relying party collude. Because the identity provider, of course, still knows to whom it has given which credential and to which public key it has signed with attributes. So the identity provider and the relying party, if they collude, they can figure out that behind that anonymous movie user is actually Alice. And this is still a problem, and this is not going away with classical signatures, and we're also running out of tricks here. And that is not a surprise, though, because we're using classic signatures and classic certificates that were never invented to be used by people or for their digital identity. They were invented for machines. But machines don't care about their privacy, so also the technology for them didn't have any privacy features built in. And we could already see that as soon as we wanted to add some privacy, like selective disclosure or some unlinkability, we basically had to work around the nature of signatures. And that people have very different privacy demands than machines, and we need different signatures and certification schemes is a very well-known problem in cryptography, and we have worked for more than 2 decades to build the proper signatures and certification schemes that are not only secure, but also privacy-friendly by design. And this is what's called anonymous credentials. So when actually a group of cryptographers were asked for their expert feedback that summer on the European Union Digital Identity project, this is the feedback that we gave, and they said, let's just use anonymous credentials because they were invented for that purpose. And I won't have time to go into detail how they work, but I would like to give a kind of tiny glimpse on what the overall idea is and where we get now this kind of the security and privacy at the same time. And the overall idea of these anonymous credentials, or the overall setting, is actually quite similar to classic certificates. So the user will still get a credential with all her attributes from an identity provider, also bound to a user public key. And that gives us the unobservability and also the security, because we still rely on a strong signature scheme for certifying the attributes. The core difference now is that if the user is presenting her attributes, she's never sending the cryptographic evidence over. She's never sending the signature over or her public key, but she does what is called a zero-knowledge proof that she has them. And these zero-knowledge proofs are one of the, I think, most beautiful things that cryptographers have invented, and also one of the oldest things we have. It's from the 80s. And that allows to prove or to make a cryptographic sound proof that a certain statement is correct without revealing anything beyond the validity of that statement. So what we're doing here is we prove, or the user proves, that she indeed owns a credential or a signature on the attribute she decides to disclose, and that she knows the underlying secret key. And she cannot create a proof unless she really has that cryptographic evidence, but at the same time, the proof is not revealing even a single bit of how the signature looks like or how the public key looks like. And so that gives us, apart from selective disclosure, also the full unlinkability. Because if one zero-knowledge proof of that fact isn't revealing a single bit of information, then she can just create a fresh zero-knowledge proof every time. And because every proof reveals nothing about the identity provider signature or the public key, also several proofs don't have any cryptographic evidence that allows different presentations to be linked. And this is really the core power and feature of zero-knowledge proofs, anonymous credentials. So one very often explains zero-knowledge proofs as the capability that I can prove that I'm over 18 without revealing my date of birth. And that is indeed a really nice feature, but it's really just the cherry on top of the cake. Because what is way more important is that I can prove that I have a credential, that I have a public key without revealing anything about that. Because that really allows me to have a single credential and to bootstrap as many unlinkable presentations as I want, and also to bind all my credentials to a single key and really have a proper digital identity. And that is the blueprint that basically all anonymous credential schemes follow. And what we need as a core building block then is a signature scheme for the identity provider signature that actually allows for such zero-knowledge proofs, that I have a signature without revealing it. And the most efficient and mature way to do that, to use a designated signature scheme that has these zero-knowledge proof capabilities built in. And the most prominent signature schemes are the 2 types of CL signatures, BBS signatures and PS signatures, which are roughly the same complexity as classic public key signatures. There's also a different approach that is getting close to practicality that even allows to build such anonymous credentials on top of any signature scheme, even eCDSA that doesn't have the proper property by itself. But then we need a way more heavy tool on top of that, which is called a generic or circuit-based zero-knowledge proof compiler. And I said it's reaching practicality, but it's just by the nature of it always several magnitudes more complex than having a signature scheme with a built-in capability. So in our cryptographer's feedback, we gave the concrete recommendation to use BBS signatures because that's the most mature and complete protocol we have for that purpose. So Thomas, if anonymous credentials and zero-knowledge proofs is what cryptographers want, what is in the law that can help our wish come true?
As you can imagine, getting these technical details that are actually so important, privacy-preserving technology is the precondition for making this stuff safe. But yet all we could get was a recital, but we do have an explicit mention of zero knowledge as being something that needs to be in the European Digital Identity Wallet. And there is a strong commitment on several levels that this will happen. But right now the consensus is, yeah, we need it, but we don't have it right now. And although, like Anja just explained, this technology isn't new, it has been around for 20 years, there are many obstacles that the architectural reference framework process, the technical implementation has faced so far. Right now, it would be possible to do zero knowledge in the specifications that we have, but it wouldn't be mandatory. It would require reform of the implementing acts to actually deliver on that. And let's come to the last safeguard. And I know that's one that has been debated quite strongly in Germany, and that's deniability. What is deniability? It basically means the proof that a certain data about yourself is correct is not transferable. You can convince one party that something about you is true, but not someone else. If you don't have deniability, you're basically handing over your name, or your dead name, if you're trans, and that includes also the proof that this was true. And suddenly the personal information becomes much more valuable in case of a data breach. And deniability is something that you can understand basically as either signing the data or signing the channel via which you're transferring the data. The latter option is usually what you want. In the law, this is the one concept that's not mentioned, and that's also because it really wasn't part of the debate on EU level. There wasn't a single amendment calling for it, also not from traditional allies like MEP Patrick Breyer. We have one thing in the annex that says, yeah, you need to sign something, but it is not really clear whether that's the channel or the data itself. So the good news is we have nothing in the law preventing deniability. It is just something that is completely left to technical implementation. And such a debate happened in Germany quite strongly already. In 2022, we had a hearing in the German parliament where the situation was explained in detail, and the clear consensus was, yeah, we want deniability, we don't want to have signed data. That was also the starting point of the German Interior Ministry when it launched its public consultation. Yet the plot twist is that this autumn, the CIO of the German government basically came out in support of signed data. So that leaves us in a situation where the only country where this ever was a debate seems to have done a U-turn, but it will certainly be something where maybe with more technical innovation, things could become better again.
Indeed, because the answer again is anonymous credentials and zero knowledge proof, kind of to heal these two worlds. Let's take a step back again and kind of look at what deniability means. And as Thomas said, what we want to have is that when presenting our attributes, we want to still convince the relying party that these attributes are true and they're correctly signed, but we do not want that the relying party can convince anyone else about that. And the main goal of that is that we want to protect against malicious relying parties, or we want to contain the damage in case of a possible data breach. And as was said, kind of the fear is if we will now have signed data lying around, or government signed data, this could be more valuable targets, or kind of also make data markets kind of more lucrative. And to be fair, even if we have a classic zero-knowledge proof, also the zero-knowledge proof is verifiable against the public key of the issuer, so we would have the same problem with classic zero-knowledge proofs. But the good thing is, as soon as we have a zero-knowledge proof, we can just change the statement that is proven. What we can do now is we do what's called designated verifier or an OR proof. And instead of letting Alice prove that she indeed has a signature on the attributes that she wants to disclose, she proves that she either has a signature on these attributes or she is a relying party. So she knows the secret key of the relying party. And that now allows Alice to prove these statements for her attributes, but also it allows the relying party to create also valid proofs for arbitrary attributes. And because it's a zero-knowledge proof, we cannot tell afterwards which side of the statement was actually proven. And now we have the same argument for deniability as we have in an authenticated channel, that the relying party at the moment of the transaction will be convinced that it was Alice satisfying these attributes, but as soon as he wants to forward or sell that information, there is no cryptographic evidence anymore that these attributes were real, because the relying party can just create, as I said, arbitrary transactions for arbitrary attributes. So with that, we can have deniability even though we are in the world of signed data. I would still be somewhat cautious to not overestimate the power of cryptographic deniability, and I still believe that the best protection against data breaches is to avoid oversharing in the first place, and that will be done by proper RP authentication, by selective disclosure, and unlinkability. But also with other features that only become available once we have anonymous credentials and zero-knowledge proofs. And I think one of the most important ones is proper pseudonymous authentication. Because at the moment, pseudonymous authentication is considered more like a glorified password manager, basically decoupling your pseudonymous identity from any strong security assurances. But with anonymous credentials, things don't have to be that black and white, and you can really create a partial identity, only revealing the information that's absolutely necessary and tightly binding that to a cryptographic pseudonym. You can also make the pseudonym of a domain-specific type, so you can only have one or a handful of pseudonyms per relying party for use cases where this is required and they really want to know that you have a single account with them. And my hope is that if we make pseudonyms more powerful and more meaningful, we can actually replace a lot of scenarios where at the moment we send our name, date of birth, email address, and phone number just to prove that we are real and that we are unique at that platform with actual pseudonyms. And that's just one measure we have with anonymous credentials. There are many more kind of things we already invented, all aiming to further reduce the amount of information that we show during presentation or issuance. And with that, you might get a bit suspicious. Because if anonymous credentials are such a great tool, they're not even that new, they're out there for 20 years, where's the catch? And they even have seen some real-world adoption. There's an ISO standard, there's some ongoing IETF drafts with BBS signatures that are being written, and it was already supported by hardware in 2014 with TPM 2.0. So we already had some adoption, but the catch at the moment is that these protocols would not be supported by the secure elements that are in the phones today. So they can essentially only support ECDSA signatures. And if you know how cryptographers feel about ECDSA, this is particularly painful. And that kind of leaves us now in a kind of really annoying vicious circle, because at the one side we have legislators that want, and system builders that want to design systems with what is available from secure elements now. And on the other side, we have secure elements that only provide what is asked for them. So if nobody's asking for new APIs, they will not provide that. But if system developers don't want to ask for it because they want to do things now, we will never be able to break out of that vicious circle. So I believe the best way forward is if the EU actually could take kind of a strong stand here and say, yes, we want to use zero knowledge proof-based systems because that's the only technology that really is privacy by design. And once there is a clear demand for that technology, I'm hopeful that the secure elements will provide us with the APIs that we need for that. And we're not asking for much here. So the only thing that a secure element has to do for these BBS signatures is essentially to prove what's a Schnorr signature in an elliptic curve that's slightly different than the elliptic curve that's on there now. So with that, I do remain somewhat hopeful that we will see that this is actually going to happen, and we will see a digital identity system that is built from privacy-enhancing technology. Thomas, what are your final thoughts on this?
So, what's next? We actually have to come to some minor legal other stuff that is still on the table. As Anja mentioned, pseudonyms are still a big battleground. Right now, these are just glorified password managers. And we have the huge risk that the EU might sleepwalk into a real name internet. Because pseudonyms should really be the option to lie about your name whenever the person who's asking is not under a legal obligation to identify yourself. So when your bank is asking you for your real name, yes, you have to give them the real one. But if Facebook is doing that, you should be able to give them Mickey Mouse, and they should be impossible to distinguish that from a real name. That is not what's in the implementation right now, and we actually believe there to be the widest gap between the law and the wallet it will have. And there is a huge problem, so that's why we need to come back to pseudonyms in order to renegotiate some of those core functionalities. There's some minor good stuff like the transaction history is now complete and also includes aborted transactions. You can freely choose to which data protection authority you're complaining. There were limitations on both of these points before. But the most important safeguard still to mention here is the discrimination protection. When you are choosing not to use the wallet, both in the public and private sector, you are protected against any type of discrimination. This is still something that could go wrong. Most importantly, like the Commission is in closed-door meetings telling the member states, don't worry if you don't meet the deadline, we'll not sue you, we'll not initiate infringement proceedings. So this deadline of November 2026, take it with a grain of salt. Second, the whole security concept is based on certification. The same member state that will issue the wallet will also certify its security. You can see why that's wrong. And the basic premise, and this is why this layer of safeguards is so important, and they all have to work in conjunction. Digital identity systems are either extremely respectful to our privacy and do the utmost to protect it, or they shouldn't exist because their harm probably outweighs the benefit. And this is still where we are. We're going to stick to this file and also continue with enforcement and implementation work. This isn't done. And then just to conclude, we do all of this basically because of support from the community. And just a few months ago, we struggled actually with our finances, and I just want to say thank you to the 400 people that started to become supporting members. They make all of our work possible. And that's where we conclude, and thank you and look forward to your questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for the nice talk. Let's start with mic number 1.
Hello, I'm Michael. Just a few months ago, NIST has approved first round of post-quantum signatures and indicated that in 11 years it will be illegal in US to produce anything that is not post-quantum secure. That gives 11 years expiry date, and that's optimistic, right? Because Australia tells we only have 6 years. So 2030, they will not approve anything that is not post-quantum. Some quantum researchers are quite optimistic about hacking the keys, and they say maybe even 28. Why would we commit to BBS scheme that is not post-quantum secure and would mean that all these eIDAS will be hacked and faked in 2 years after implementation?
Yeah, a very good question, of course. I would just like to put also the NIST document a bit into perspective. So what the NIST document says is that encryption and ECDSA signatures should be replaced. It's very specific about what's done. It does not say any classical cryptography has to be banned by that. But you're absolutely right that BBS signatures and also all other signatures we have at the moment that are really practical and we could kind of use today are all classically secure, so the unforgeability would not hold if quantum computers are out there. But first of all, I don't think that the threat is that imminent. I don't think we will see a quantum computer in the next 3 years, maybe in 10, 20, 30. And while it is right that we have to be quite concerned about our encryption, because you can store everything now and decrypt in 20, 30 years when a quantum computer is out there, things are not that critical for signatures. If in 20 years a quantum computer is there and you can break an authentication session from tomorrow, it doesn't matter because already the session has been gone. But you're right that all these signatures basically have already an expiration date kind of put on them. But we still, I think, should build a system now, even though we know it will only last maybe for 10 years or 15 years, so that the people who are developing quantum-safe constructions have a very clear target of what they have to develop. Because otherwise, we don't really know where to start. We have so many protocols, so many extensions, so I think we have to build a system to give the quantum-safe cryptographers a very concrete target, what they have to rebuild with their assumptions.
Let's go with mic 3.
Hello, big fan of both of you. He was asking for the future, I'm asking for the past. So I've been working myself with uProve and eIDAS, and eIDAS has been implemented in smart cards in 2015. Why is this not mentioned? And why is this not part of the solution?
eIDAS is a CL signature. So I worked actually at IBM for 10 years. So yeah, I was part of the team that has done that. It was even earlier. So we had prototypes on smart cards 2010. So even when the new identity card in Germany came out, we could have put all the technology already in the smart card back then. So yeah, uProve, eIDAS are all technologies that have been providing the necessary signature schemes, all the extensions. So it's part of it. eIDAS was just the IBM brand name. CL signatures is the technology that's beneath it.
Mic number 4.
Yes, thank you for the outline. I appreciate the effort you guys put into that. I think it's very important. In my opinion, if there's one thing that should be in government hands, then it is this whole identity management and all these kind of things. However, we've built a whole industry environment around this whole issuing of certificates, DocuSign, Adobe Sign for the signatures and everything like that. And having watched legacy on IT stuff going through Europe in the past years, I would expect you should have a tremendous lobby pressure from these kind of companies to maybe prevent or have it their way. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
I mean, there are several industries that are quite active in eIDAS, but yes, everyone who works with signatures, with legal signage, they are, of course, stakeholders that were at the inception of eIDAS, in the 2014 version of it, and they're quite strong stakeholders. Trust service providers are, of course, directly in the law. Their business case is regulated. They stand to gain a lot of money for providing qualified electronic attestations, basically any attribute that's legally binding. And so, yes, this whole industry will be heavily regulated and will stand to gain a lot of money. From a user's perspective, like eIDAS is very clear that the wallet will remain free for the user, and that what is quite difficult to see is like the business model of the wallet itself. There was a huge debate in Germany, like how should they actually make money for it, and again, like I'm actually not that unhappy with that, because I want the wallet to be basically a public good. I mean, it needs to be open source already in its application components, but I want a really privacy-preserving, free and open source wallet that users are free to choose. That's hopefully the direction we are heading towards. There are some good projects going in that direction, but ultimately there is a blocker here because governments can decide, like my passport only works in the list of these wallets and not the others. So the whole ecosystem question is one where we need to pay a lot of attention.
Thank you.
Mike one. I think, yeah.
One? Sorry. What is the short, sweet argument for deniability when sitting opposite a politician in a news studio? Why should people be allowed to lie?
Why should people be allowed to lie? Why? I mean, I can make a political and a legal argument. The political argument is that you want to convince someone about the fact that something about you is true, and that should be transitory. That should be something that you express to them, and they can be convinced. They need to be convinced. That's the beauty of the cryptography that we've just explained. But this fact about you shouldn't be something that they can then further process, sell off, or maybe get stolen out of their hand in case they are hacked. There's the political argument that leads to the legal argument. The eIDAS law actually says at several points that the user has to be in sole control about their data and their wallet. And you can simply not be in sole control whenever you hand over something. The other person the other company might do something illegal with it. And I mean, that reminds me, 3 years ago, I had the first discussion with the Commission about the whole thing, and they basically told me, yeah, but the GDPR should fix that, and we know it doesn't, but we cannot repair the GDPR here. But this is ultimately the problem that it leads to.
Mike Chu.
Hi, thanks for the talk. My question kind of works on top of the previous one. What I wanted to ask is, are there provisions or discussions regarding like the other side, like say whether the app needs to be open source or the API that the government provides be documented, whether you can like have an open source app alternative and stuff like that?
So in the law, there is an obligation that at least the application components of the wallet needs to be open source. We wanted much more. We wanted the whole system, including the SCAC, be free software. We didn't get that, and even the open source provision has a security exception. This is the typical compromise that you get. But we know that there will be free software wallets that are developed, in part also with funding from the European Commission. And there certainly is an ecosystem, but it is also public knowledge now that Google and Samsung and other big corporations are also working towards developing their own wallet. And you can expect these platforms to be intertwined with the existing surveillance capitalist model. So yes, there is a real case to make for alternatives.
Mike 3.
Okay, my question is, during the talk you mentioned a couple of times users' phones. Do you really mean that in the law there is written something about using the wallet on a phone, or it is okay to use it even on, I don't know, a computer, a normal laptop, or even dedicated hardware, purposefully built for that purpose?
This is a simplification that I introduced here for the talk. It's actually not in the law. If you're talking with the negotiators and if you look at the technical standards, most likely the first wallets we'll get are smartphone apps. But there are also examples of browser-based wallets. There are also systems that think they can do it with a hardware-based token, and again, some browser element. And desktop wallets are theoretically possible, but I don't know whether anyone is working on that. So most likely we'll have it on the smartphone or on the browser. These are the two avenues in which there is active development that we know of. Nothing in the law is technology specific.
Okay, thank you.
Unfortunately, we have time for one last question, and I'm going to give the chance to the only person that cannot ask it otherwise, so the Signal Angel.
Yes. Do you have any information regarding the mandatory storage of fingerprints on digital ID cards?
The mandatory search of fingerprints on... could you repeat the question?
Do you have any information regarding mandatory fingerprint storage on digital ID cards? So where you need to store the fingerprints on your ID cards?
Okay, this is actually a different law. I'm not completely keen on the details, but there's a different European legislation that mandates biometrical information on at least passports and I think also national ID cards, but I'm not completely sure. This is not something that eIDAS is regulating per se. The only biometrical stuff we have in here is that in the person identification data set, they added a biometrical facial image of the person, but that is optional. So this is actually not something that you need to have in order to have your identity into eIDAS. There's nothing about fingerprints in it. Of course, you could have an attribute about your fingerprints. And when we think back about the EU Digital Travel App, the one which is tied into migration databases, there I would have real concerns about the spread and proliferation of biometrical information, including fingerprints or other data points.
All right, thank you so much. I have to kill it.